students for a long time. And I suppose my philosophy in relation to teaching and how I've actually um, worked with students uh, has been shaped first and foremost by my own education, um, and then second by a particular atmosphere at York University when I started teaching. Um, that at the time I certainly thought was quite innovative, very multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and my own training had been uh, quite unorthodox in terms of traditional history. Um, so I think a combination of rather bizarre undergraduate and graduate career um, has made me always appreciate flexibility, and I've always encouraged in students flexibility. Um, I like to, I'd like to appreciate, I'd like to push students and challenge them so that they see things and think of things in different ways than they would have in their own upbringing and their own previous education, just as I had. So it wasn't that I was doing anything that I hadn't experienced myself. Uh, uh, so when I started teaching at York, uh, it was a time of political radicalism because of the Vietnam War, because of civil rights issues in the United States, because of the War Measures Act in Canada, because of a whole series of things that made it a period of where there was quite active involvement. And so I started teaching with that sort of framework, that sort of mindset. Um, it was a generational one, um, and um, and then in the course of teaching, I developed specific ideas that I think I pursued pretty consistently. Uh, I make a big distinction between undergraduates and graduate students. Um, Undergraduates are learning stuff. They're going beyond their home environment, their high school experience, and learning and seeing things at a very rapid rate. That's a very steep learning curve. Um, there are various aspects of what has to happen during that period. One is the acquiring of new knowledge. Two, the ability to express both verbally and in writing ideas in a coherent way. Um, and that's very important, of course. And graduate students are quite different in my estimation. I sort of have considered that whether or not it's been entirely successful, their ability to write and think has been achieved, and their ability to express themselves has been achieved up to a particular level, and that the graduate experience is really intended to broaden that. It's actually the one of the most, and I think you can really only see this in hindsight, but I think it's one of the most fruitful and rewarding periods of education and life because it involves so much reading It's such an intense period of reading. You have to be able to read fast. You have to be able to digest information fast. And that reading actually helps in the writing, in the writing skills, because you can't write well if you haven't read well-written English or any other language for that matter. And so the reading is both acquiring vast quantities of new knowledge and at the same time improving language skills and facilitating improvements in writing. And which is why what I try to get my students to do during their graduate years is the reading is there. That's a given. The quantity of reading is inexhaustible. The more you read, the better. And the competition among students, even if it's not a open competition is really still there. Who reads the most? Who digests the most? Who can display that knowledge the best? That's what the game is about. Is acquiring those types of skills, and it's competitive because the difference between undergraduates and graduates is in the graduate environment, you really are in competition with your peers who also tend to be your best friends. And you have the most in common. You're interested in the same subject. You're going to go and do some exciting things as in the graduate student schedule. You're going to go and do things that are quite adventuresome because you're going to go to archives, you're going to go to different countries, you're going to go to different parts of your own country, you're going to do all kinds of things that are quite exciting. If you display, in the history context, if you display an ability and a desire to work in certain circumstances, which not everybody would find particularly attractive or interesting or want to do. Working in the archives is extremely different than working in construction on a highway, and not everyone is going to want to create a database where entering data is about as boring as you can possibly imagine, and you have to maintain a certain level of attention so you don't make mistakes and enter false data and all this kind of stuff. And it's not everybody can do that. On the one hand, it's as trivial as scanning a document. On the other hand, you're doing it so much that it can be considered to be extremely boring. But believe it or not, there are people that actually don't mind doing it. And I know in my own case, I have no problem at all spending lots, hours and hours and hours doing what other people would think is about the most boring thing that you can imagine. You know what? This is checking grammar in text and proofreading other scholars, junior scholars often, their work, and marking them up with track changes to the point where you write almost as much as the person whose essay that you're looking at, because you want everybody to be better, and to have those skills and to do that is acquired. It's very, very much acquired. I can remember in my own case milestones in learning how to write and how to write better, and how to think and how to deal with things better. And I wouldn't say that I am the best writer in the world. I'm certainly not won a Pulitzer Prize or anything like that. But nonetheless, I've written a lot, and I know that certain straightforward, almost bread and butter, meat and potatoes, very simple way, I convey what I want to convey. So helping others attain a certain level of mastery of the language is one of the things that I've considered to be particularly important, and which also happens to take a lot of work, not all of which is as enjoyable as other things that I do by any stretch of the imagination, but it's absolutely essential that somebody does it. And I can say that in my experience, the writing part of doing history and being and learning as a student is just about as complex for every single individual. You can be a native English speaker, or it can be your second or your third language, and you can have problems of enormous proportions in terms of expression, because the written language is completely different from the spoken language. And how you do things in writing and how you do things specifically in history in writing, as opposed to other disciplines. These are all dimensions of the teaching and the mentoring that has to go on. And as I say, it takes a lot of time. And somehow over the years, how to put this? Somehow over the years, I've become more and more skilled at noticing whether or not a comma should go somewhere or not. Trivial little stuff like that, but I see it. I correct it. The missing quotation mark. And I can say that over the years, I developed those skills before the spell check and grammar check that now are so useful and so helpful. So helpful. And therefore, this raises the ability to teach how to write and what to do to a new level. Because every student, every person has to learn that somebody else has to read and criticize what you wrote. You can't be absolutely certain that you really said what you wanted to until somebody else tells you that they understand. And if other people can see things in your writing that you can't see in yourself, and all of this kind of feedback sharpens the writing, improves the writing. There isn't any, even in fiction, there's nobody writes fiction or poetry who doesn't spend hours and hours and hours, spends more time revising than writing the first thing, much more time rewriting and reorganizing. And it really comes down to looking at every single bloody word you put on the page and making sure it's the word you want. Because there may be another word that's a better word than the word you're using. And that may even lead you into seeing that you're using a phrase that you don't need to use. All this kind of thing, the self-discipline and how to read things is is just essential, and you can't do it without mentorship, without someone standing over your shoulder and correcting and making suggestions. It used to be, but it's not necessary anymore. But it used to be. I would tell students, listen, the last thing you do, and when you write, you got your final copy of your essay you're about to hand in, read it backwards. Read it backwards. Start at the end and look at every word backwards, because things will jump out at you that you don't see when you read it as you normally read it. You jump over mistakes you didn't mean. You jump over misspelled. You jumped over grammar. But you see, because now the grammar and the spelling can be checked, you don't need to do that. Because that will be automatically done, which is fantastic. But before, that was the strategy. Um, uh, and you have to remember that in my experience in learning how to write, the technological advances have just been so enormous that it's like a different world. I mean, I had to use my PhD thesis. There was no computers. It was on a typewriter, and it meant that if you made a mistake, not easy to correct, and that meant a lot of retyping, and was a period in which a lot of people made a little extra money because they could type well, and so they typed somebody's thesis so they wouldn't make so many bloody mistakes. Nothing was automatic in correcting it. And then the fact that you needed 2 or 3 copies, this was even before photocopying machines. So you just see the transformation now, that you can cut and paste, you can search, you can do all kinds of stuff you just simply couldn't do before. So so I've had to adjust in terms of my mentoring, and I've had to adjust in terms of what I think are most important in terms of learning of skills, in terms of doing research, um, and and it's been the mentoring has really been accompanied by a continuous reevaluation of my own work, my own research approach, and um, and I think in many ways I've been very successful. I've had a number of really very, very good PhD students who have very good jobs, who are full professors in other universities today, are in leadership positions, or publishing, and and I've also had some individuals who were in PhD programs who never finished, and experiences have ranged from extremely pleasant to extremely unpleasant. But that's the nature of teaching, because you really do put yourself out on the line. And for me, in terms of graduate students, I've always, maybe because I've been at York University, in terms of my field, a small university, it's not a big place like Harvard or Wisconsin or Berkeley or Oxford. So that in recruiting students, I've always thought that if someone really showed a particular interest in wanting to pursue a PhD, we could deal with whatever uh, uh, skills they needed to learn that they might not have. And so I've worked with quite a range of students from Africa, from the Caribbean, from I've even had one student from the United States. So anyway, uh, I've had a couple of cases that were extremely disappointing where students didn't finish. They they either didn't live up to expectations in my own mind on one hand, and the potential which was clearly there was not fulfilled. Um, and it's a rough road because you do 3-4 years worth of PhD work and then you don't finish. Well, you've lost 3-4 years out of your life in terms of development of a career and a life, because you just have to go off in a completely different direction, because 3 or 4 years of graduate school without graduating leads you nowhere. It doesn't do anything. So so there's been some disappointments like that. So it's a risky business, teaching in this way, where you want to make sure that in the outcome of the students, are successful in terms of getting jobs and developing their careers. And in many cases, there has been, and in some cases, it has not. That's my attitude towards graduate students, therefore, is very different from undergraduates. Undergraduates, I have completely different. I feel that when students get out of secondary school and come to university, there's one big thing that has to happen in their heads. Every student's head, if it hasn't already happened, and usually it has not happened, is that the individual has to decide that he or she wants to learn. If you don't want to learn, Jesus, I don't care. That's my attitude. I really don't care. You don't want to read the assignment, I couldn't care less. I am not there to spoon feed. I am not there. I am a resource person. I am somebody who can help to expand people's horizons, and I'm somebody who's there, who can help people make decisions about what they want to do in life if they haven't been successful in making those decisions already themselves. But the one thing that I just never have. So that means that in the classroom, do I care if any student speaks up and says anything? Nope. Nope. I appreciate it. I don't like. I don't want student evaluations. I don't think I've ever read any student evaluations of my teaching, to tell you the truth, even though they're mandatory and they're done and everything like this. I mean, I can remember one of the early student evaluation ones was students being asked what did they think about the readings on the course. What? They shouldn't think about anything. They should do them. They're not in a position to assess what's being done or how the courses. They're not in a position. So what's the purpose of the evaluation? I mean, so I've never really felt that was something that was my job. My job was to be there, to help. Inevitably, really good students emerge. Never many. Although I have taught and visited other universities where every student in the class not only was interested, was really bright and had read everything. So I'm saying if it's not done at York, that's York's problem. It's not like there isn't situations where, um, it's a different, I would be teaching quite differently in a situation like that. And I'm thinking specifically because I went and gave a week worth of lectures at NYU's campus in Abu Dhabi. And I can tell you that every bloody student in Abu Dhabi at that university is smart as anything you ever seen and speaks so many different languages and comes from every single different country. And, and teaching that group, well, that's a completely different thing. So, but at York, I've seen a number of students. I've particularly appreciated working with the York sponsored programs for student employment and assistance, work study, Ray, and things like that. I found that with virtually no exception, over the whole time that I've been working, having undergraduates working in these capacities, have I been disappointed in anyone's performance. And in all the cases that I know of, the students have gone on to graduate school, professional school, and other things and are successful. So, and I think the work that was being done for me, and then with the team that I have maintained, was extremely beneficial in terms of their education and their development, because I think that the skills that you acquire, that can be acquired in working on a project, even though the particular participation may be look like a very fringe area of the larger project, nonetheless exposes individuals to the broader picture, so they can see that what kinds of organization, what kinds of infrastructure, what kind of are necessary to achieve things. So I think it's good in that way. Oh, yeah, I do. When I was in graduate, the normal thing here now is that graduate students become TAs, and in PhD program, I think everybody becomes a TA in some course or another. When I was in graduate school, nobody did any teaching like that. Wasn't done, and if there was a chance to do it, or something like that, it was considered it was because you weren't good enough to get a grant, and so there was a status thing as well as a workload thing and a whole bunch of stuff. So it didn't happen. So the first time I taught was when I finished my PhD. It was finished, although I wasn't actually awarded my PhD for another year. But when I finished my PhD, I taught a summer course at University of Wisconsin, and African history summer course. And that was my first teaching. I'd never thought about teaching. I had observed a lot of really good teaching, because one of the things that I had done both as an undergraduate and as a graduate student, the idea of missing a class, I never was in my head. I never missed any class. I never, ever. Never. And not only that, but I sat in on classes I wasn't even taking. I sat in on lots and lots and lots of lectures and stuff and courses that I wasn't taking. I just what I did. And but I hadn't taught, so this was the summer before I came to York. It was the first course that I taught, and I was a hippie. I was a left-wing hippie, demonstrating in the streets half the time and doing all kinds of stuff. And so when I was lecturing, I didn't think of myself as being any older than anybody, the undergraduates that were taking the summer course. It was about 25 or 30 or something like that. And we were all dressed the same way. We all looked alike. We were all politically aligned. And it was like, it was like it was like a love-in. It was like somebody could have put on, Morrison and the Doors and played the music, and we would have behaved exactly the same way as if I was lecturing. It was that kind of atmosphere. That was my first teaching. and it was very nice because my two mentors, Van Ceda and Curtin, very nicely gave me copies of all their lecture notes and said, "You're going to need these." And I sure did. So I just basically, read and followed their lecture notes, and that was my lectures. So it was all nicely prepared. And I learned a lot teaching it. Then I came to York, and I had to I taught some kind of at the time we had a course called history, a course on history as a discipline, which all history majors had to take, which long ago has been killed, but at the time it was a required course. And so we had to teach methods of historical research. That's what it was called. Good God. So you had 20 kids in the class, and you sort of made up what you did for the whole year. So that was one course. That wasn't so bad. African history wasn't so bad because I had all the notes and had already done it once. Then I obviously started, branching out and doing it in my own way. We didn't have PowerPoint then, but we had slide projectors. And so I have a whole collection of slides and stuff, so that I could show one of the things that my colleagues at Wisconsin and I did. We had all agreed on in advance, as we all went to different parts of Africa. Everyone had good cameras. Would you please take pictures and da 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 da. So we shared all those slides and stuff, so that we had some good pictures of different parts of Africa, which we could then use for teaching purposes, which is what we did. And so then I had to teach another course in the humanities division, which I had never heard of before. I didn't know what the humanities division was. This is where York was light years ahead in terms of interdisciplinary and in terms of being more flexible for undergraduate teaching. And humanities and social science. For some reason, I was stuck in humanities rather than social science, which turned out to be extremely pleasant and enjoyable. I didn't mind it at all. I liked it. But I had to, and then at that time, the colleges actually were allowed to give first-year courses, seminars, small groups, and I gave a Founders College tutorial, it was called, but it was a full course. I had something like 8 students in it, and one of whom became my best friend in Toronto for years. Again, that boundary between student and teacher wasn't there yet because I was just, it was like a student myself. So, but then after 2 years at York, I went off to Nigeria, and I taught in Nigeria for 2 years. And, and that's when I became a professor. And when I came back, I've been a professor ever since. It wasn't, the boundary that was blurry before was no longer blurred. I knew a lot more than any of those undergraduates about a lot of things, and there was no question about it. And I was in an area of research that was expanding so rapidly, and I was so well placed that my learning curve in African history was really what propelled me at the time, and it was easily reflected in teaching. You just had to talk about what you were doing and what was going on, everybody else that you knew in the field. In the 1970s, I knew everybody in the field. Not now, but then. Everybody. Now the field is gigantic. Then it wasn't. So it was easy really to teach because I just have to say, this is what Alan Isaacman's doing down in Mozambique. This is what Gene Hayes doing in Kenya. It's easy, because they're doing good work. They did do good work. They do good work. Well, Gene isn't with us anymore, but Alan certainly is. So all of my network from graduate school, I had in the 1970s, in the 1980s, I had so many visitors that came in here that were my graduate school buddies, talking about their research, all the time, visiting, giving, and attending classes. It wasn't, I don't think at the time I appreciated it. I thought it was fantastic, and so did they. And it was really great, and it was fantastic in terms of the networking. In terms of the impact on students, I would say marginal to nothing. The sizes of my classes were so small, all during that period, were just tiny. They're not like now, where the field and the subject matters are very acceptable, and people, are just as likely to take these courses as anything else, quite frankly. But it wasn't always like that. But I did have lots of people come through here, and then that really boomed in the late 1990s, and when I started doing even bigger projects, which is where I am until now.